Good afternoon. Welcome to Cuyahoga County's Community Development Committee on Reinvestment and Advice to our, it's a subcommittee of the Community Development Committee. Today is Wednesday, July 21st, and it is approximately 2 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you do the roll call, please?
Calling the roll, Mr. Jones. Ms. Stevens.
Present.
Ms. Blackwell. Ms. Wheelow. Willow's absent today, and Sally Martin is here on her behalf. Mr. McDermott. Mr. McDermott's absent today. Ms. Anderson. Ms. Anderson is absent today. Mr. Zone. Frank Ford is here on his behalf. Mr. Benjamin. And Mr. Sarin. We have a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilwoman Simon is also in attendance.
Thank you for your attendance, Councilwoman Simon. Do we have any public comment this afternoon?
Yes, we have one person signed in for public comment. Lou.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Nobody Lou is here. First, I want to thank all of you during the COVID-19 pandemics. Even you guys have to do this meeting remotely. I have been faithfully following all the episodes, way more than those cat videos. So today, finally, we can get together in person. I have little silly questions. Due to what happened yesterday in the county council meeting, this question, I really have to get it out of my little chest to ask. If there's a possibility this subcommittee can look at into one particular thing, is if in our banking industry here doing the business, do you see any of them creating or actually using any products to make loans to developers making multifamily projects, affordable projects, or even especially the multifamily affordable projects? Homeless people, we want somewhere to go. However, right now we have nowhere to go. It's not only the Ramada Inn is the issue. The whole society has all different parts falling apart. As the poem I sent to all of you on Monday, my body parts falling apart. And we don't want our county body parts falling apart continuously like that. So I wish somebody can look into that, and maybe this will be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we review our minutes. Have members of the committee had a chance to review the committee meetings from last month? Committee meeting minutes from last month. I have a recommendation for an approval. Is that correct, Mr. Benjamin? Is there a second? All in favor, aye. Thank you. If there are no objections, the minutes are approved. And now we move to matters referred to this committee. The matters referred to the committee also work in conjunction with miscellaneous business because Mr. Ford has a presentation in summary on something, and I want to have all of that discussion at once. So I'd like to move into the discussion of appraisals and single-family construction. Our agenda has Tanya Maness and Michael Wackers. I have to look because I always, for some reason, want to call them Lagers. But they unfortunately get to be witnesses in a federal judicial case in Akron. So we probably passed each other on the highway today. And they are scheduled for testimony. So my memory is that they're waiting in a hallway and not quite at the table to testify. On their representing them, if you will come to the two seats in the center and introduce yourselves to the committee. I've asked these folks to join us because privilege of the chair is that we need to understand how this appraisal process, some recommendations for changes at the state and federal level. The City of Cleveland, under Tanya Manessa's leadership and continuing into Director Michael Wackers of Community Development, have a specific set of recommendations. Before we move on, I'd like to have that clarified by them, because our prior discussions were simply about the memo that was written. So let's see, ladies first.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Aisha Weeks, Bank Relations Manager, Department of Community Development, City of Cleveland.
And good afternoon. My name is Ed Stockhausen. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy and Public Policy at Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. It's great to see everybody, and thank you, Chairwoman Stevens, for inviting us today.
Okay, go ahead and begin your presentation about your history, what you found, and what the kind of recommendations are, and what the priorities from those recommendations are.
So we have a PowerPoint. It's gonna show up somewhere. I think even as we transition into this new phase of the pandemic, we all have to offer each other a little bit of grace with technology as we figure it out. We'll do a little bit of ad-lib perhaps while this gets figured out. The reason we're here today and talking about appraisals is because home ownership is the principal mechanism for building wealth in America, right? We buy our homes. There we go. Terrific. Thank you.
As Ed was saying, home ownership is so incredibly important, especially to wealth building. And one of the things that has come out in the last year with the pandemic is the gap in wealth between majority Americans and minority American families. And so the core of what makes value happen in neighborhoods, and why that gap grows wider and wider instead of shrinking over the years since the first home ownership by African Americans started in the late 50s, is incredibly important. And if we can figure out some direct ways to attack and use the leadership of Congress, Senate, and Housing and Urban Development, and all of the federal entities that are involved in housing toward making a change, then we will have accomplished something in addition to our oversight and involvement with lenders in this marketplace. Ed.
Thank you. So the pandemic has exacerbated existing problems. The persistent effects of redlining and systemic racism continue to have ramifications today that include higher rates of poverty, lower incomes, and higher rates of unemployment. Home ownership can help deal with poverty, but we will not solve poverty in this region unless we deal with home ownership. So Cleveland is the nation's largest, poorest city, and the effects of poverty spill over into other communities. That's why this matters for Cuyahoga County Council. A strong urban core defined both as Cleveland and Cuyahoga County is critical to our region, defined as Cuyahoga County in Northeast Ohio. Helping residents build wealth in their homes will help decrease poverty, will strengthen our neighborhoods, our communities, and will strengthen Cuyahoga County. So, why do appraisals matter? Because homes in some Cleveland neighborhoods are undervalued. That's what we found from this appraisal study. What factors are contributing to that, and what can we do about it? So there are just a couple points worth noting here about the appraisal industry. Two major federal laws regulate the appraisal industry. The first is the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act of 1989. Right? The National Appraiser Qualifications Board, under this law, establishes minimum education, experience, and examination requirements for state licensing. So immediately we know that the state has a role in the appraisal industry here. And the second item is the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010. This is in response to the Great Recession, right? This is where we try to put a little bit of distance between the financial institutions and the appraisers who go and evaluate properties. We have a couple study basics. First, this was commissioned by the Cleveland Department of Community Development, when it was then led by the president and CEO of Cleveland Neighborhood Progress now, Tanya Maness, and the department is currently led by Director McKeel Wackers. Emily Brahman was the contractor asked to do this study. I know that she's come and testified before to this committee. It was completed in February 2020, so we're just a little bit over a year out from this study. It's still very relevant. And the focus here is residential single-family properties in 6 Cleveland neighborhoods. That's the scope of it. There's an opportunity to look at more, but that's what we have here. I'm going to turn it over to my partner here, Ms. Weeks, to explain more about the neighborhoods in the study and what was found.
Thank you, Ed, and good afternoon again, everyone. So I think that Emily, in her presentation a few weeks or months ago, would have gone over the scope of the appraisal study, but I think it's kind of worth understanding what we were seeking to find out by commissioning this study. So really, the scope of the study was to have a detailed summary of how appraisers approach appraisals for residential single-family properties. We looked at 6 appraisals in each one of the neighborhoods that are listed here. That includes Glenville, Fairfax, Kensmin, Mount Pleasant, Lee Harvard, and Union Miles. And we wanted to have them provide us with a detailed assessment regarding the quality of information that was available in the market to even perform appraisals in these neighborhoods, and also look at some of the unique challenges and considerations that an appraiser will have to go through that were unique to the east side versus even the west side of Cleveland, and then also that might be different for the inner ring suburbs, for instance. And then we wanted them to evaluate the recommendations and provide feedback on some of the ideas that we were already contemplating, such as a clearinghouse for recent arm's length transactions, considering the city of Cleveland having a certification program for appraisers and also realtors, continuing education classes for local appraisers, as well as having a second appraisal program for Cleveland home buyers to be able to check factual errors, as well as if there were any inaccurate comparable properties that were selected that caused the low valuation. So that was a scope that we provided for the consultant. And some of the major things that we discovered, even just looking at the different neighborhoods, is that in Lee Harvard and Mount Pleasant, there were very few issues that they found that were barriers to being able to find comps in those neighborhoods. They had quality of information was there. So they were able to, have the data that they needed in order to find comps to value the home. That was less true in neighborhoods in the property and Union Miles, where less than 20% of the sales were listed on the MLS. And so the appraiser didn't have that data that is so needed in order to appraise, homes in the way that would get us to a true valuation. The same with Kensmin, I think, was a very unique challenge, where there were so few sales in that area that, again, it presented a challenge to not having that on the MLS, which is what appraisers rely on. Quality data posted on the MLS of interior photos and just making sure that they have that information that they need. And also, in Fairfax, it was really pretty much the same in terms of having that quality information. One of the findings that we found in Glenville was there was a disconnect between what an appraiser's perception was of amenities and what was actually valued by someone who was buying a home in an urban environment. Sure, you can. So just kind of looking, taking a closer look at the property. So looking even at Lee Harvard and Mount Pleasant, stating that there was no significant issues in the quality of information. One of the things that I did go and look at Zillow, but something that's not included actually in the appraisal study, is actually go, because this happened, the appraisal study was in February of 2000. Well, these were homes that were actually listed, right? And so we kind of want to go back and look at what happened with the home. Did it sell, and what was the sales price? So I think that it's worth kind of reviewing, and it's a little enlightening to find out where the sales price actually landed. So looking at the home in Lee Harvard was the only home out of the 6 that actually appraised. The other 5 did not reach the asking price, so that obviously complicated, could have complicated the sales of those properties. But looking at the home in Lee Harvard, which was 16917 Biltmore, it was listed for $84,900. It appraised for $85,000, and so it came in as 100% of the list price, but it actually ended up selling for $60,000. So I think that maybe someone got that home at a really great discount. But if we're looking at the home in Mount Pleasant, it was also listed for $52,000 and appraised for $50,000, and it sold for $50,000, so about 100% of the list price. But I think things that really stand out, and if you can advance, I'm not sure if Fairfax is the next one, but I'll just jump to Fairfax. The appraised value was $33,000. The list price was $65,000. So the appraised value was 60% of the list price. When I went to look, that home was sold in October, and it was sold for $82,000, which is 248% of the appraised value. So clearly, in the market, buyers saw value in that home and purchased it at 248% of the appraised value. Also looking at the home in Glenville, 9112 Parmalee, was listed for $54,900, was appraised for $41,000, which was only 75% of the list price, and it sold for $48,000, which is 117% above what the appraiser appraised the property at. And we also see that in the last home in Kensmin, which was kind of a further boundary than what the traditional Kensmin neighborhood would be considered, just because of the lack of comps. And it was listed for $39,900, appraised for $35,000, which is 88% of the list price, and it sold for $47,000, which is 134% of the appraised value. So I think that even though it wasn't in the scope of the appraisal, just kind of going in the appraisal study, going back and actually looking to see what the market commanded in these situations really shows us that there's a disconnect between what the market is saying and where these homes are being valued by the appraiser in this study. But this obviously signifies a larger issue, not just the appraiser in this particular study. You can advance that there. So some of the big challenges that we face was, of course, the rehab properties not transferring through the MLS. And what we see is that there are, a few issues as it relates to this. You have properties that may be from even out-of-town investors who are transferring properties through an LLC, right? So they'll sell an interest in an LLC, and the only asset in that business is the home. And they're doing this to avoid taxes. And so we're seeing that doesn't help when it comes to having comps that appraisers can then use in those neighborhoods to help us to get to the true value of properties. We're also seeing multiple transactions of a uncertain origin. I think it kind of also goes to some of these transfers of properties that are, like one of them in the study, transferred 3 times in one day. And so we think that maybe that's an issue of wholesaling was identified in the appraisal study, that people who are doing these very different types of selling and buying and selling of homes may be causing this to happen, and we're not able to have that quality information, and it's not listed as a true transaction that we can use for comps. And again, also looking at the perception of amenities. If you look in the appraisal study at Glenville, it was noted that there was a park that was across the street from the home. And this park wasn't seen as a neighborhood asset. And it was noted in the study that perhaps if this same situation was in the suburb, people see value in having a park across the street. But the perception of a park in an urban area somehow really just drums up a totally different idea of whether or not that's valuable or if that's a detractor. And this was the area that was close to the cultural gardens. And in my opinion, a home that's across some beautiful cultural gardens would be of very high value. And I would argue that if the cultural gardens were in a different neighborhood in the city or perhaps in the suburbs, that possibly appraisers would look at it with a higher value to the neighborhood than it's being perceived right now. And one of the other things that I'll mention here is, of course, implicit bias of appraisers. And I think that is one of the things that is really critical as far as the considerations and how you actually end up attacking that. I think that some of that comes through the ideas of whether we should have a certification program either within the city or even contemplating that regionally. And having some of that racial equity training that's a part of, say, continuing education. I think I'm getting into some of the recommendations, but because I don't want to get ahead of myself. So those are some of the biggest challenges that they identified in the study that really need to be addressed if we're going to move forward.
All right, so we've taken the liberty of looking at the recommendations in the study and just kind of categorizing them. We'll start locally and then move up to the federal piece because that's so important. But we also want to articulate where these changes could live. And as it turns out, many of them can just be local, whether that's at the city or at the county level. There's opportunity here for both partnership, but also action, right? So the first recommendation is to build and maintain a database of sales not currently captured in the MLS listing so that real estate professionals can use it for comparisons, right? That's an opportunity to get information that doesn't exist there, but that we can get from other sources, whether it's Zillow or having teams that go out and find the information and getting it into the MLS, right? Is it work? Absolutely. But does it benefit the whole region? Of course it does. The second recommendation is some sort of local certification, either with Cleveland or the county, of appraisers who understand urban housing markets, right? Our markets are very different than what you would find outside of Cuyahoga County. There's an opportunity to make sure that appraisers know the neighborhoods, right? Know our communities, know our cities and our suburbs, and can speak to that work. There might be an opportunity to add on to the per unit appraisal, right? So that those who are certified locally have some sort of incentive to know these markets better, right? Get certification and then do their work here and do it in a way that is meaningful for all of us. The third recommendation is continuing education for local appraisers. How can we work with this particular real estate profession to help them better understand our communities? This is the difference between someone from Medina coming into our community in Collinwood or West Park, Avon, or Solon, right? They're different places. What can we do to help them understand our communities and the amenities that we value? We can also look at gap financing. The City of Cleveland currently has a gap financing program, and they're looking at making some changes to it based on what they've learned over the last few years. This would be for projects, either new construction, rehab, or renovations, where you might end up spending more money than what the home would appraise for after the fact. If you can identify what that gap is and create a program that pays up to a certain amount for that, you can not only refresh the housing stock, but you can begin inspiring development here locally. There's also the opportunity to do realtor continuing education to increase their understanding of the challenges and restrictions that face appraisers. These are different industries. These are different professionals trying to achieve different things, right? And what I have heard is that oftentimes it can feel antagonistic, right? Because your realtors are trying to sell the homes and appraisers are trying to do their best with the data available to get an accurate number for what that home is valued at. And sometimes you can feel the conflict and the tension there. That can be healthy, and we can help realtors understand the issues that appraisers face and maybe help them find ways to be able to help appraisers too. There's also an opportunity to do credit counseling for home buyers and provide them with education on the appraisal process and access to capital so that, as necessary, they can steer their own ship about what they want to do when they are looking to buy a home. We also have opportunities with the state of Ohio. So first is something that would be good for the entire state, but that Cuyahoga County could also take action on. We could require the documentation of contact information for buyers and sellers on all real estate transactions, cell phone numbers and emails. It would be so helpful if we could just get in touch with the people who buy homes. When that information's not available, and when appraisers don't have anyone to call, no way to even try to get in touch with somebody, that is a huge problem when they're trying to put the appraisal together and they're looking for comps. It doesn't mean someone's going to answer the phone or reply to your email, but at least they can try. It would be great if we could do this across the state of Ohio, because there are so many communities like Cuyahoga County where appraisals are an issue. We could also work with the Ohio Department of Commerce to update the qualifying education requirements for the different levels of appraiser certification. That is where, in the state of Ohio, the appraisal industry is regulated by the Ohio Department of Commerce. To Ms. Weeks' comments earlier about education and making sure that they understand markets, this is the place where if we could work with the department to require that or to update the education requirements, we could have a huge impact everywhere. We also need to assess the racial and gender composition of Ohio's appraisal industry. I say that here, and I want you guys to hold on as we look at the next slide to really understand what that issue is. We say it here because we don't know. We've looked, we can't find the data. There are disparities. If Ohio's appraisal industry looks anything like the federal appraisal industry does, we have some issues. There's also the challenge to fix low compensation per appraisal. Appraisers make, $300 per appraisal? They have, on average, about 48 hours to get it done. That means their time is limited, and if we're asking them to do a quality job, they're speeding through to get as much of this done as possible so that they themselves can, make an income. If we could pay them more to do a higher quality job, to dig into data, because it's hard right now, especially for these industries, we could help turn around this problem. Now here's a really important piece, right, at the federal level. First thing I'm going to do is pull everyone's attention to the graph in the upper right-hand corner. Here are two things that we know from the Appraisal Institute about the appraisal industry as it stood in the beginning of 2019. It is over 75% male, and, I wish I could move this, can I move our little video box? It is 85% Caucasian. You can kind of see it down there right now. Overwhelmingly so. And that is, thank you, that is in part because the appraisal industry is run through an apprenticeship program that continues the disparities that existed long ago and continues them today. If Ohio's industry looks anything like this, then we know that this is a huge problem, and we've got to address what the industry looks like. We have to recruit into it, which means recruiting for better salaries so that we can draw talent into the field and have an industry that looks like the communities where they're going and appraising. So that's the first recommendation there, right? We've got to work with state agencies and other interested parties to recruit a diverse workforce. We could also require disclosure when appraisers are not geographically competent. You wouldn't ask someone from Oklahoma to come here and appraise. Oh, there we go. Thank you. We also need to consider creating an alternative pathway to becoming a licensed appraiser that does not rely on the existing apprenticeship model because of how that has not lent itself to the diversification of the workforce. We also should consider activating vacant land and buildings to create community amenities, right? If that's one of the things we hear, that amenities are so important to the appraisal industry, what can we do and how can we leverage federal funds and programs to do that, right? These are just some of the options available to us on the federal level, but there's action at all levels of government that we could take to help deal with this issue locally, at the state level, and ultimately at the federal level, where we need leadership and guidance. Ms. Weeks, is there anything else you would add for additional context about this study that you helped bring forward and that we're discussing?
No, I think that's it. I want to definitely leave time for any follow-up questions that the committee may have. And I thank you so much for having us here.
I apologize for my tardiness. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Ms. Weeks, the several examples where you cited on the valuations in the various neighborhoods, whether it's Fairfax, those, how much do you, first of all, when was that time frame where those appraisals occurred?
February of 2020.
Okay. And I'm wondering, particularly those units that transferred, that you said for a higher value than what they appraised, do you think how much was that attributed to, the COVID effect and just people saturating the market and wanting to buy versus just an inadequate appraisal?
I mean, that is a good question. Looking at the range of when they were sold is pretty much towards the end of the middle and the end of the year. So we had some in May, as well as one in October and another in December. I think that's something that's worth further research. There's also been a call for us to do, or either the city or another entity, appraisals on the west side in neighborhoods that may be a little bit more diverse, or neighborhoods where we're able to have a strong comparison of whether some of those same challenges exist with comps, data quality, to be able to have a fair comparison.
Mm-hmm.
So something the same way that you're able to test for other things, having an appraisal study or testing would also be able to give us some color in terms of why this actually happened. But that's a good point in terms of how much was the rise in demand for housing due to COVID.
Madam Chair, the reason I asked the question is my son just bought a house. He's a homeowner now. And he's been looking for the past 5 months. And every single offer he put in multiple neighborhoods throughout the city, whatever the appraised price was, the homes was transferring traditionally. He was losing out on every single home. And so I'm just wondering how much was that attributed to this rise in demand versus what the actual appraisal said?
We're not sure, but I've been asking that question in the markets that I work in personally. So in Akron, Canton, and Cleveland, we've been looking at that collectively. And what we're finding is that those transactions that take place above appraised value, typically the owner, unless they can get the appraiser to go back out and reappraise, is looking at kicking in personal equity in cash for that excess amount. Is that what both of you found?
Well, we're seeing that as I stay connected to those realtors, and we have like monthly meetings on receiving that type of feedback. That's what we are hearing, is that surprisingly, I don't really know where people are getting all this cash from. But we're seeing cash is king in this market. And as well as some people are borrowing from their 401k when they're able to. They're paying the full price in cash, and then they're refinancing to pay their 401k back. It's nice to be able to have that as an option, and if you're so able, but there are so many who either don't have that in their 401k or have 401ks that are just not available to be able to do that. And I think even more so, what's even more dangerous, I think, for those who are trying to compete in this market is that anyone who has, say, like a government-backed loan like FHA, that's going to take additional inspection and more time their offers aren't competitive. So you have either conventional or cash that's really driving the market. And those who are low to moderate income, or those who, need to have low down payment products as far as mortgage, aren't able to compete in this market. And I think
They're
that's
the
where
ones
the
who are
danger
losing
is.
out
Mhm.
on a lot of these sales.
Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry, were we finished, Mr. Zone? Mr. Sarin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out, I guess, along those same lines, I know case study isn't necessarily universally instructive on this, but the property that we were looking at on East 86th in Fairfax, that property in particular, just looking at the history of transactions and transfers on that, it sold 3 times last year. The first time it sold to an investment group for $25,000 in July, and then it sold twice in October, first for $57,000 and then for $82,000 to 2 different LLCs. And sort of to that point, it is those investment groups that are able to just put the cash up, grab the properties, and then sort of restrict the market for people who want to be owner occupiers.
Chairwoman, if I might, these investors are a growing problem that we've recognized across Cleveland neighborhoods. There's no problem with mom and pop having a couple extra properties here locally, right? And taking care of them and knowing the tenants and building a community with diverse incomes and people who rent and own. But when out-of-town investors, and let's be sure, people outside of Cleveland have a ton of money that we are not used to seeing in those amounts, buying up properties because our homes look cheap to them and hoping to hold on to enough of them in enough neighborhoods where the values go up to make up for any losses that they might have. This is a huge problem because it does rob our neighbors of the opportunity to own a home and build wealth in it. It is predatory investing because these people do not know our neighborhoods, that often are not investing resources to improve the homes in any meaningful way. And instead, that rent money is flying out of this region. There's no compounding effect of it, right? This is a growing problem. There are neighborhoods in Cleveland, and I have no doubt outside of Cleveland as well, where the majority of homes being sold are going to out-of-town investors. This is a huge problem, and it's a lost opportunity, one that we should be addressing now so that people who live here today have the opportunity to build wealth in their home and build a better future for themselves tomorrow.
So that leads us to the question of why so much concentrated focus on appraisals in relationship to what was our initiating conversation, was trying to be advocates with the relationship that Cuyahoga County has created with Key Bank. And the nexus for all of this is the fact that if we want diversity of people owning homes in our communities, and I look toward our 2 mayors or their representative, they want a diverse group of people owning homes and financially stronger people over time. Having been a mayor, I know that when I was mayor, and still do as a county council person, want the homes that people buy to increase and appreciate in value, so that when they get ready to retire, they have a nest egg in that home, which they can reinvest in a smaller home in my community. But those are the kinds of things we want to see, and this pulls money out of our communities. These investors are not reinvesting in those units the same way families reinvest in those units. They do minimal reinvestment. That means minimal investment in our communities and the wealth being pulled out, and sometimes not even minimal investment. So we're working with the first lender on these issues, but we need to understand why these issues are impactful long-term to both the core city and especially our entering suburban communities. Does someone else have a question?
I have just 2 thoughts on this subject. And we had this wonderful presentation at our GCRC meeting just recently. And one point of advocacy that I think is low-hanging fruit that you have as a recommendation is collecting contact information for the buyers and sellers. So GCRC did reach out to Brian O'Malley, the county recorder, on that issue, and I think that it's something the county could easily start doing and should start doing right away. Secondarily, the VAPAC Investor Working Group has been compiling a list of all of the people buying homes in bulk in Cleveland, and has a very robust database on that, and has actually traced different LLCs back to a single entity. And if that work could be expanded on, I think it would be very powerful, and that's been spearheaded by Tim Kobe at the City of Cleveland. And it's pretty interesting when you start to connect the dots, and he actually has created matrices with line drawings, and they're complicated, and they, going to certain characters, that are operating the market. And we know that in Old Brooklyn, Holton Wise has been controlling their market, and there's nothing for homeowners to buy. And also the issue of FHA buyers just being shut out. It's not helpful right now.
So what department is Tim Kobe in?
Building and housing.
Okay. Mayor, did you have a statement you'd like to make?
This is really great information. Sadly, it's something that we all know. What's frustrating for me is when we sit around a table and we talk about the same thing over and over again. And when the answers are right in front of us. We know that we know that the appraisal industry has been dominated by white men forever. We know that. We're here today talking about local opportunities for change, certification by Cleveland County appraisers who understand the urban housing markets. We know that this is an answer. And we've known it for more than 3 decades, but yet there's nothing in place. I would hope that we're not the group that will sit around the table and talk about the obvious things that we already know, that there will be actual action plans to address it. We know that we have a partner in Tri-C and workforce development and Scale Up, so we should quickly be beginning to really implement these best practices, to make this a curriculum. The years I spent in the property tax industry, we were told that, that African Americans just can't get the math and they don't go into it. That's a problem, and so let's give them the tools so that we can address the certification, and we can also address what we know is implicit bias, and we can access this racial and gender composition. I recently had an appraisal, and I am a quarter of a mile from Walton Hills. So the appraiser says, if you could just pick this house, move down the street, it'd be worth another $200,000. And I'm looking like, I already know that, but this is what they do, and the bias happens east versus west side. Or if I could pull my house and move it to the west side. So there are things that we know, and it's great that it's in this presentation, it's great in this PowerPoint, but I challenge this group to actually lift these things on this piece of paper that we have heard over and over and over again, and that we actually begin to implement. The next move, we've got the research, we've got the data, we have the knowledge. It's implementation. If we don't implement, we'll be sitting here next year talking about this, and investors will come in and continue to buy up our properties in our communities because we've done nothing to help the people there that want to buy the house across the street from their mom, because that's happening a lot. They want to buy, I've got young people moving back. I ran into a family from Massachusetts that just bought a beautiful home they saw on the website in Maple Heights, and now they're going to buy. So it's just such a beautiful place, and it's just wonderful. And my stomach began to turn, because that's what you're saying. We as local, we see it all the time. They're super excited. They're super excited about the money they're going to make, and the investment is minimal. We know this is happening. If you know you have high blood pressure, you should probably go get some medicine and start taking it right away. This just tells us what we already know. So I hope that in subsequent meetings we can check off what we've done. We've contacted Tri-C or whatever the institution is. It's going to Hondros, which does real estate license, or we've got a relationship with Hondros that we're going to put this training program for appraisals in place. And the math is not that hard. I took it. But we do have to train people to do this, or we will continue to be white and male-dominated. There is bias when an appraiser walks in the house and says, if I could just move your house down Dunham Road a quarter mile, it'll be worth $200,000 more. They say that, and there's no shame in it. because it's true, and there's bias just east and west. So we're going to continue to have other people seeing the value of our communities, whether, and Dollar Bank or whatever the bank is that came to me and said, okay, we have down payment assistance, because there's so much counseling that we can do. I mean, counseling. People want to say, okay, if I've sat through this counseling, and Barbara Anderson did a great job in Maple Heights, how do I get my house? So that counseling, if it's you put $100 in and we match it, and then if people can see the pathway to home ownership, they'll do the counseling. But if it's always, I'm going to give you counseling, and your home ownership is 3 years away, you're going to lose them. We're losing them. We've just got to act. We must act. Thank you.
Before I say anything else, Council President?
Anything I would ask, is there a presentation for implementation, even more in depth or further elaborate on what the mayor said?
I'd like to take a stab at that. I'm here today representing Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. We know that our neighborhoods are not bounded by municipal lines. Our neighborhoods often cross over municipal lines and share different municipality names, right? But that doesn't stop people. It doesn't stop a neighborhood. And the same issues that we're facing in Cleveland are faced across Cuyahoga County in different ways. But that is why I'm here today, and I'm here on behalf of our president and CEO and our entire team and board of directors as a partner for Cuyahoga County Council to deal with these issues, because it's good for our entire region. We are committed to being your partners in this work. I think there's a lot of opportunity. Do I come with the roadmap? No. But am I happy to help build that with you? Absolutely. And do I get to do some different type of work because I'm not an elected official? Absolutely. But this is the opportunity available to us. And I absolutely agree with the mayor. This is not the time to continue looking at presentations about the issue. When I bought my home with my husband 3 years ago, we were offered the opportunity to buy it through an LLC so that all the tax records would be obscured. We chose not to do that. But this is getting to the point where it's becoming an individual option for people who are buying homes. We can't afford that in this community. We need to create more opportunity for our low and moderate income neighbors to have these same home buying opportunities, ones that strengthen our neighborhoods. And I am here, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress is here to be your partner in that work.
I'd like to add, and thank you, Mayor Blackwell, for your comments, and especially talking about those who seek to be investors in their own communities is something that at the City of Cleveland we are engaging partners on. As we do hear those stories that happen where a resident owns a 2 or 3 family in a neighborhood, but they don't see it as an asset. And to me, that breaks my heart to know that you're sitting on something that could be cash flow, that can help to create generational wealth, and you're not able to leverage it because maybe the home needs some home repair or it needs to be rehabbed, or you need to have that technical assistance on, because a landlord is a small business. So then you actually need to know how to actually take this property from something that you can consider a burden to how you can be a business owner in your own community. And so obviously owning investment property isn't the culprit. The thing is not giving residents who live in that neighborhood the opportunities to be investors in their own community. That's where we go wrong. And so we are in conversation, thinking and talking to nonprofit organizations, CDCs, that have begun to conceptualize what this could look like, but need to have that support in order to be able to pilot something like that. So I agree that now is the time for action, and I think it's all hands on deck, and where we're able as a county to know that we're all in it together. And I think that being able to work in partnership with those who have the ideas on the ground, but just need either that financial support or, from philanthropy or from the city or county, and the technical assistance to be able to make it happen. So those conversations are happening, which is encouraging, but obviously more support is needed.
So I think the mayor has a call for action here. And you inferred that was where we needed to go in your presentation materials. And so we really are talking about three things, in my opinion, that I'm recommending to the balance of the committee. We have a working group in the committee, and the working group has, and Frank, would you come up and sit where Mark would have sat? We need to make sure the reason we came together was we wanted to make sure that the lender who had the largest specific contract with Cuyahoga County through our treasury activities they created 13 items they would commit to. We want to make sure that we actually measure those items and see improvement in those items. Then we also found this specific item is of detriment to us, and we need to make sure that the state and the feds take proactive steps, change the law that makes decisions about who these appraisers are, what they know, and how they know it. So the next step, yes, we spend a lot of time talking, but the next step should be the steps that give us items to measure. So the first one is what Frank will present next, and then I want us to move to appraisals. So this was probably one of our last general conversations, but the next series of meetings will be very specific about the best action steps to take, and every time we get someone on this working committee to write what the steps will be. They'll have to come back to us, we'll discuss them, we may go back again, we may all agree at once, but it will go back and forth before we actually have real things to tell third parties that we want to get done. So please be patient with us, because ultimately I think the mayor's absolutely right. We have to tell people what they need to do, whether they're at the state level or the federal level, to help things get done at the local level. Because a lot of our appraisers and a lot of our banks say, this is what we do this because FHA wants it, or we will, the feds say we must do this, or the Department of Commerce, you ask an appraiser why he or she doesn't pay more attention to the community and the neighborhoods and the type of investment that a municipality is making. Oh, it's because the state tells me this is what I should do. Well, the state establishes ranges, and we've got to find the mechanisms that allow us to recommend and lobby and get changes at the state level and the federal level. So we are collectively going to move toward recommendations for Key Bank first, and then on to the appraisals, I think, because there's more than one person at this table. So any other comments about the presentation or from the two
I just have one
presenters?
last comment, because you mentioned the banking contract. One of the things I've mentioned in the study was that even though Dodd-Frank, caused there to be a separation between appraisers and the bank, they go through these intermediaries, which are the appraisal management companies. As far as the certification and requiring that additional training, it was noted that the financial institutions can contractually require those appraisal management companies to hire Cleveland or county certified appraisers for that program. So there is a role and there's a direct ask of financial institutions that within their contract, they can say that they want to support this the certification program, and knowing that they understand Cleveland and the other cities within the county. So we can't let them off the hook, because there is something that they can do.
Has the city created a certification process that they have, for example, given to Hondros, or there's one other company I think that does them, that does
We
the
have
training?
not as yet.
Okay. So we, the public sector, and members of our communities and leadership in our communities need to formalize some type of programming or the elements of the programming that we want Tri-C and Hondros to adapt for this county. And so before we step out to add that to our list of things to do, has anybody been working on that?
Not as yet.
Okay. So,
Ms. Chairwoman, the
Mm.
only other thing I would add is that one of the opportunities in front of you and your colleagues is what you do with the American Rescue Plan Act funding that Cuyahoga County has received. That is a transformative opportunity to make investments that fix some of these problems, where a little bit of money could go a long way in getting data, getting things up to speed, or even helping with home repair programs that take care of deferred maintenance for some of our low or moderate income neighbors who might be on fixed incomes or might just not have resources that even qualify them for other programs, right? But there's an enormous opportunity in front of us with the funds that have arrived from the federal government, and it's really an incredible opportunity to think transformatively about how to begin addressing systemic issues that were only exacerbated by the pandemic, but for which there's now funding to really move the needle.
I would say to that point, those ARPA dollars, as you mentioned, we have the next 3 years to earmark those dollars, and then 2 additional years after that to fully spend. Cities receive those dollars as well. So I would imagine the next 3 years, not imagine, but expect over the next 3 years, there should be conversations between the cities and counties to not duplicate activities, but find ways to, again, leverage those dollars and work in partnership.
So we have started our conversations at Cuyahoga County, but we are not finished. We have not made any final decisions. We haven't even made a first round of decisions, have we? About how to spend those dollars. We just got through our first conversations about what was eligible, maybe 2 weeks ago, Joe? So it's a large amount of money. The city of Cleveland's pool is over 500. And yes, it's twice as much as ours. And then several of the communities, about 7 of the communities have received anywhere from 15 to 38 million. So that's about 7 that a couple were grandfathered in because they're under 50 now. But I saw those numbers, and there's some comprehensive conversations those communities have to have, but we also have some communities that we're supposed to take care of, and those communities are also able to apply directly to the state for some funding. So we've got those things to look at, but to the mayor's point, let's talk about actions that we'd like to take. And the working group and I have been working to discuss how we do metrics, because that's how we decide whether improvements, if we're seeing 5 loans made for rehab purposes in our communities or 5 mortgages, then do we want to see 10 or 15 and over what schedule? Can we begin to walk through that? You only emailed it to me and my phone is in my car. Is your phone with you so you can forward it to Ashley? Monday? Well, we're all now emailing Ashley at least once a week. Well, yesterday my text messages were not reaching our staff from our county council meeting. So I had problems. I came in early and Trevor tried to help me, and
Okay, it may take a few minutes, so you can probably start.
so Frank, you want to start with the dialogue?
Can you hear me okay now? Sorry about that. With the mask, it's a little muted. So the working group was, as Chairwoman said, Chairwoman Stevens, me, Matt Zone, Barbara Anderson, Gary Benjamin, Sally Martin. And I put together a draft, which I think we looked at several times. In fact, this committee, this subcommittee actually saw, was June our last meeting? I think that I did present it, and there were some suggestions made to go back and tweak it, edit it a little further, which I did. But I think one of the things I did is at the beginning, at the top of the document, when you get it, you'll see, that I made a statement that there are actually two fundamental ways you could measure KeyBank's performance. One is using data with numbers, you know, how many loans, how many applications. But the other, and actually since I'm sitting almost in Mark McDermott's, or I am sitting in this position, it was Mark who suggested that in addition to data, there are also commitments. Yeah, thank you. There are also, well, that's the old one, but that's okay. That's all right. There are also commitments they made that aren't very good. So it says the proposed framework measures progress in two ways: by documenting a milestone, a date of approval, or an action taken referenced in the commitment, and then second, by documenting a change through numbers. And I think that first one was what was missing in the earlier version of this. So the way this is laid out, let's talk about that for a minute. It's got, the first column are the KeyBank commitments exactly as they appear in Exhibit 4 in the contract. The red highlight, it was just me arbitrarily drawing my attention to something that I thought was the key thing in there. What I did then to address Mark's suggestion, see if this will, hold on a second. I was hoping the wheel would scroll down, but, oh, it does, okay. Right here is an example of, so within the text, they said they would do something. They would work with county to, et cetera, and it says KeyBank will consider the use of a loan loss reserve, loan loss guarantee. So the problem in some respects is, as great as this is, and it is great because this may be, the Cuyahoga may be the first county in the country that actually got a bank to commit to something like this. City of Cleveland did it 20, 30 years ago, and there are other cities who did it, but Cuyahoga County may be the first to get a commitment like this. On the downside, the commitments can be a little vague. And here's an example of one. They will consider a loan loss guarantee. Well, what I just inserted here to nail it down is the loan loss guarantee fund was implemented on blank date. It either was or it wasn't. And that gets to more of a, did something really happen? But let me continue with what's the layout here. The second column are possible metrics for addressing that second way of measuring things, which is looking at actual numbers. And so the essence of the first one is talking about mortgages, loans of $50,000 or less. So what we can do is we can look at the number of loans they made in 2020, compare that to the known number of 2019. We can look at the number of loans then made in the first 6 months of 2021 if they provide the data, which is another issue here. But so possible goals, benchmarks, the actual loans KeyBank made in 2019, 50,000 or less, and the county was 14. For reference, because Huntington and Fifth Third just happened to be two of three banks, Key being the third, that have made substantial multi-billion-dollar commitments to increase their lending in Cuyahoga over a 4 or 5 year period. It's worth using Huntington and Fifth Third as points of reference. Huntington did 55, Fifth Third did 37. So from that perspective, you could say KeyBank really should be improving what they're doing. They all probably could be. I think you can make an argument that all these numbers might be lower than we'd want them to be. So desired, this was me just throwing out a number, doubling it from 14 to 28, desired first 6 months of 2021. If it went from 28 full year to 40, is 20 the appropriate? So the numbers may not be the important thing right at the moment, more than just get a sense of what I attempted to do here. We could go through all 13. I've attempted to have, if there are numbers that are appropriate, I attempted to do it for all 13. I definitely attempted to do what Mark had proposed, is look at each of the 13 commitments and extract from it, is there a action step or a thing that we could say they did it or they didn't, and what date did they do it by? Should I stop here for a moment and just... Mhm. It's the memorial, what? God, yes.
So the reality is
Yeah.
that they've got to produce amicable relationships.
Mhm.
The loss.
Mhm.
We don't want to be.
And I think what this is intended to do is to give this subcommittee a tool to, and so that you can go from what, again, I've praised the fact that they've made the commitments. The downside is that they can be a little vague. And this gives you a tool to go a little deeper and find out, is something happening or not? Because if without something like this, it's going to be awfully murky for the next 4 years.
As long as they were open,
Yeah,
they'd be
right.
okay.
Yeah.
So, should we go through another example about this, since it's after 3 o'clock? If I'm reading the screens correctly, since I left my phone in my car. And go through one more example.
I can do one
The
more.
one I like is the challenge grant one.
Oh, well, where's that one? That's, is it number 9? Let me go to number 9 if I keep. Yeah, you're right, there it is. KeyBank will participate in the challenge program and extend it throughout the county. We should point out that KeyBank has been participating in Cleveland Heights only for how many years? 20, 30? A lot of years. And so the request that's been made to them, starting well over, like I think 3 years ago, Greater Cleveland Reinvestment Coalition, which Barbara chairs, has been asking them to do that. And it's great that this got in here as one of the 13. So they will extend it. What I put down in the bottom here is KeyBank received a proposal from Home Repair Resource Center, that's the Cleveland Heights organization that's been sponsoring it, to extend the program throughout the county on blank date. I know we could get this date. They submitted the proposal. Sally, do you know? Well,
I
we
talked
can-
with Key, and
Yeah.
we need to have another conversation, and I want them to come back to this committee once we send this
Yeah.
chart to them. But the reality is that they are also trying to open it up so that they can achieve volume. So Key has come up with a couple of ideas about how to get other parties to participate in a loan/grant program like the Challenge program, and have maybe Cleveland CHN Housing Partners partner with HRRC, because CHN is so much larger and can handle more volume. So there are ways to do this, and we want them to come back with us with action plans on how to help achieve even bigger numbers than what we ask for.
So the key thing I had here is that they would execute a contract with Home Repair Resource Center. Maybe that becomes they execute a contract with Home Repair Resource Center and CHN Housing Partners, possibly. The examples of the metrics, now it's worth pointing out here that the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data, which I use to do the research, does not indicate whether something was a challenge loan. So KeyBank will have to tell us the number of customers enrolled in KeyBank's, oh, wait a minute, I'm looking at 10, excuse me. The number of challenge program loans in 2019, they will need to disclose that. The number of challenge loans done in 2020, they will need to disclose that. So, or actually, maybe Home Repair Resource Center could disclose the number in 19, and I guess they could disclose the number in 20 because that's over. Yeah, so some of these, I jumped to saying the Key Bank would have to do it, because there are some things in here the Key Bank would have to disclose, but this is a simple matter of asking Home Repair Resource Center to tell us what happened in 19, what happened in 20, and then establishing a goal for 21.
Okay. So what I want to do next is have Ashley email this to all the members of the committee so that you can edit what we're specifically asking for, because this is the first action step we're going to ask our partners to take a look at what they can do. They upfront committed to these 13 items. Some of them were not as specific as they could have been. Now we're asking them to define them. And we'll take some feedback from them. There might be a way to articulate them a little bit better, but this is the first step. If we can get them to specificity on a majority of these and then work out the little details on the balance, then we can move on to some of the other action steps that we need to have, and maybe some of the other lenders in this marketplace. Mr. Zone.
Thank you. Yeah, I like your approach to this. Unfortunately, this is, a non-binding agreement with the Key Bank and the county. And so I think Key, though, has an opportunity, if it's communicated the right way from the county to Key Bank, to really hold Key out as a highly ethical lender. And this could really be a nice feather in their cap for them. So I like the way you laid that out. If it's, again, properly communicated to their team to consider these recommendations and come back, stand prepared on what they think they could implement, and then on the matters that still need to be fleshed out, have that dialogue in an open setting would be great. I don't want to back Key up into a corner where they feel like that we're hitting them over the head with the club, because we want them to be held out as a model of what other lenders should do and have other lenders follow suit on their lending practices as well.
We're actually looking at a growth process, because as you can see from the first item on the chart that Frank presented, their numbers were lower than some of their peers. We didn't ask them to even meet their peers' numbers. We looked at what they did. We think we're recommending a growth pattern that's achievable. And so we're going to talk with them about what they can really do. We're not trying to push them to do what the other two parties did added together or anything like that. We're trying a reasonable dialogue. We think they're reasonable. I have talked with them, and excuse me, Mr. Herdig, I think you're still in the corner. The director and the county executive have talked with Key on a couple of activities. It was probably mostly the executive interacting with them. Is that correct?
We've had both top level.
Oh, I need to get you to come to a microphone, Mr. Herdig.
Thank you. To the chair, Paul Herdig, Department of Development. Certainly the executive does speak directly with senior Key leadership, but also under the executive's direction, there are working discussions that go on. I've been involved in several of those discussions. Those are also ongoing.
And my memory of my conversation with the executive is that he really is encouraging this from his side of the table to Key as well.
I would say to the chair, the executive, as you are, is committed to getting positive outcomes from our relationship with Key Bank.
Mr. Herdig's an attorney, so that was a yes. So I think to wrap this meeting up, we have an outline for action conversation we want to have with Key. Unless I hear from one of you in the next 2 weeks that you've got a real problem and want to see some substantive change, I'm going to invite Key to our next meeting we'll send this to them in 2 weeks, and we'll ask them to be at the next meeting. I do want to inform you that I've asked the county executive to have Mr. Herdig and Mr. Murray meet with me a week in advance of each of these meetings. So if there's any change in the relationship, anything's gone right or wrong, they've had something new and exciting or positive, or unfortunately negative. We hope that won't be the case, but we'll stay in a dialogue in advance of these meetings so that we can begin to have a report from Mr. Herdig and or Mr. Murray on community reinvestment type activities and forward-thinking things. Because if we are to take action, we probably need to do it in tandem. So the county exec and his team aren't asking for one thing and then we ask for something different. We still may do that in the end because council is not a creature of the executive and the executive is not a creature of council. But it would be better when we're in agreement that we're asking for things similarly and our timing is together. So we'll begin to see Mr. Herdig and Mr. Murray have at least a couple of talking points, if not more, at each of our future meetings. Any other miscellaneous business for the good of the order? Yes, Mr. Ford.
This is just something with regard to Lou's comment in the public comment section about multifamily lending. I have not been looking at multifamily lending. I've been looking at what's considered single. It's really 1 to 4 family. But I could do that. And I'm reluctant to make a strong commitment that I'll find the time for it, but I'm intrigued by the question, which lenders in Cuyahoga County are making the multifamily loans, which are making affordable multifamily?
Okay.
That could be done.
So from my other life, I can tell you which one of the primary lenders, and Mr. Herdig can as well. Multifamily housing is being done by a number of the nonprofits in Cuyahoga County using OFA, Ohio Housing Finance Agency's 9% low-income housing tax credit, some home funds from Cuyahoga County and the city of Cleveland, and there's something from the feds called 202 that's typically senior. Paul, let's see if we can establish who's doing that lending. Huntington, Key, Fifth Third.
Again, Chairwoman, this would deserve an entire meeting, but briefly stated, you're correct. There's a mix of private and public sector lending because affordable projects don't pencil without that. And yes, there are many players and many federal programs. And certainly, we expect the larger banks to have community development divisions where they do this kind of lending.
We're also, both council and Paul and his team, I know that you and Sarah have spoken with a couple of groups about doing permanent supportive housing, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, is one of the primary ways the federal government in partnership with local government helps provide housing for people who have been homeless and they transition them into long-term affordable housing. I think you have a couple of permanent supportive housing projects on your list, Paul.
Oh, again, the chair, this again could be a whole other meeting, but yes, Cuyahoga County as well as the city of Cleveland have used federal funds to do the bricks and mortar support for building the permanent supportive housing. There's another equally important part, which is the operating support, which is more from our Health and Human Services Division. But just briefly, you can't just build it. It also needs a lot of operating funding, so both are important. And there's never enough, but we have been able to provide significant amounts over the past 10, 15 years.
Just on this point, if I could, yeah, I mean, it bears acknowledgement. I mean, the county's really stepped up in a major way on this space. Pre-2005, on any given day, you'd had 3,500 to 5,000 homeless people living on our streets, primarily in the city of Cleveland, but throughout the county. Today, that number is under 500, and it's because we've reached now nearly 1,000 units of permanent supportive housing. I think they're on unit number 12 now, 11 or 12 of the projects, and have built a considerable amount of homes. These are homes for people. They might be apartments, but they're people's homes, and they deserve that dignity. Paul raises a good point. The subsidies for the operating dollars is really important. You can figure out the complicated financing mechanism to build a structure, but then you have to operate it. And so, but I did want to acknowledge the county's efforts in that regard as well.
Thank you. Any other miscellaneous comments before we close this evening? All right. With no further comments, I'd like to hear a motion for adjournment. Thank you. We're adjourned.